And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. And we're all here plus one. We have Laura joining us for a brief bit here at the beginning of the show. And we have taken quite a long break here from recording episodes. Not sure how much that will come through on the publishing of the episodes, but we're going to talk a little bit about that and about some of the trips we've been taking. This is tour season for us, trip season. So we've done a couple already. Randall's done a few things, given some classes, and we've got another one coming up here pretty soon. So, Randall, you want to talk about you gave a sacred geometry talk? Is that what you did?
Well, it was more than just a talk, Russ. It was actually a hands-on, using our compasses and drawing. One of the compasses that we sell on the Outdoor website.
Carlson Custom Compasses.
Carlson Custom Compasses, yes, that's right. A very efficient design developed over doing many classes years ago, and my brother Rowan pretty much perfected the design and added the little paper top here, which is really nice because that's how you spin it, and we won't get into the specifics of it, but so yeah, we did a workshop, a sacred geometry workshop in Sedona, and 3 days. And it was hands-on. It was, getting into some of the history, some of the philosophy, but it was primarily hands-on, learning how to do the actual drawings as they were typically done in the classical days, in the Pythagorean Academy, or the Platonic Academy, and the Pythagorean lodges, and taught it by the master builders of the Middle Ages. Also, some of the same techniques used by the, master artists of the Renaissance. These techniques of drawing these particular patterns and diagrams that served as templates for architects, for artists, but also, preserved or demonstrated some of the fundamental relationships within the natural order. So it was mainly a lot of drawing, and it was a basic introductory course to getting the basics down, and it'll actually, goes way beyond what we were able to cover in those first, we went from a Friday night to a Sunday, so I think everybody had a lot of fun. Everybody had a kit, and large drawing pads, and basically all of the operations simply would use a straight edge and the compass, because that's all you're allowed to use in the classical tradition. Because what you're doing when you're doing these drawings is you're kind of mimicking what could be done on a building site by placing a vertical post in the ground and then using your knotted rope or a chain link. Link chain, those are typically the things that were used most frequently. Linked chain, you would have a chain, and then you could determine your radii by the number of chain links that you counted out. And so the chain links would be coordinated or correlated with the units of measurement that were being used. So you can count out the units. But the point is that whatever you did on paper, using a drawing compass like this, you could do on the building site using a pole in the ground, or a rod, and a linked chain, or a knotted rope. So that was the whole process of learning how to use this instrument to create these drawings. And it was, like I said, it was just an introductory course to show the basics. So it goes way beyond that, and we're going to do follow-ups on that. We're creating a course that is going to be, when it's done, I think it'll be the course. It's going to include instructions in the drawing. It's going to include animations. It's going to be a pretty juicy course when it's done, and I don't think there's anything else like it. The one that's being sold over at Sacred Geometry International is the beta version. It's 10 years old and it's not complete, so don't spend your money on that one, folks. Save for the upgrade that's coming down the pike this summer. And the reason we did this workshop was to begin to kind of launch the momentum towards that goal. And Laura, you were at the workshop. Brad was there. So, what were your impressions of it?
It was awesome. It was a great experience. That was the hands-on stuff is the best for me. So
Good.
to actually get in there and go ahead.
Yeah, and what we were doing was just basically just, this was like, the first and second grade reader version,
That's what I was gonna say. You start off drawing a circle, basically, like the compass is made for, and then how to create a perpendicular line from that, and then all these other constructions grow out of that basic idea once you learn how to make that perpendicular line, and then you move on from there. And we went through quite a few shapes and not postulates, but there's a whole list of exercises. So we got through quite a few of them on Saturday and Sunday, and people were really getting it, and get to the point where you're starting to use colored pens and really create some art.
Well, that's the thing about, people say, well, which is kind of a difficult thing to define, but I usually try to say, well, it's basically to do it right and do it effectively. It includes or encompasses all the things that you would normally think of in Euclidean geometry. But in Euclidean geometry, you have axioms and you have propositions and you have proofs. But you don't have there's no philosophical or symbolical component to it. That's what differentiates sacred geometry from regular Euclidean geometry, is that now these images, the squares, the rectangles, the triangles, the polygons, in the 2D, going up to the 3D, which is the polyhedra and so forth, they all now have a symbolical dimension to them. And see, then that leads us into the idea that the geometry was used as a language amongst initiates in various kinds of places throughout history. The most probably salient, well-known would be, the master builders of the cathedrals during the Middle Ages who used geometry as a secret language to propagate these teachings. And so a square in this system is not just a square. It has a symbolic connotation. Circle, in the most basic sense, square is terrestrial, circle is celestial. Square is earth, circle is heaven. Square is finite, measurable. Circle is infinite and immeasurable. Because the relationship, say, between the side of a square and its area is a purely rational, the relationship between the side of the square and its perimeter, whereas in a circle, the relationship between its diameter and its circumference is an irrational number. And Kyle, you know that an irrational number never repeats and never terminates, right? That's what makes it unique. So everybody knows the number pi, at least halfway educated, is an irrational number, and it never terminates, never repeats. There are these, people that, in the Guinness Book of World Records or whatever, who memorize pi, to 1,000 places or 2,000 places or whatever. But the number of places is infinite. And so we learned about some of the other irrational numbers that were at the core of the traditional systems of design and building and so forth, such as the square root of 2 and the square root of 3, and of course the golden section, which is quite famous now, the golden section, which has, it's the particular relationship of in its simplest form, a line that's divided asymmetrically so that the ratio of the small to the large is exactly the same as the ratio of the large to the whole line that you started. And there is only one point, one magic point where you can divide a length to get that relationship, that geometric relationship between small, large, and then the sum of the two, you see. And that is, of course, what that leads us into is organic geometry. So we work through geometry of the basic physical world, which is basically crystal geometry, which utilizes hexagonal and rectilinear relationships the connection between the golden section and the pentagonal geometry, the fivefold, and then how the golden section is manifest in human anatomy. And of course, throughout all the living world, and even down to the level of molecular geometry, we find right at the DNA geometry itself, we find the golden section geometry. So we got into all of that, and as a result, one of the things that we're doing now that's going to be an interesting, we're experimenting. These are not for sale yet because we haven't perfected it, but we're creating compasses that have that relationship, small to large, large to whole. So this is a golden section. We've got another prototype here that was first developed by our good friend Jeremy Lyons, Sasquatch man, right?
Yep,
So this is his, and so we're taking his basic idea and improving it upon somewhat. And so we can do this. So this is one of the examples that we use, the cubit. How the cubit is divides into the golden section. So this right here is the small, from your wrist joint, which is the space right here. There's a space. Russ, feel around on your wrist and feel if there's a space right there somewhere. You have one? You got it? What about you, Kyle? Do you have one?
I don't have those.
You don't have
He's
those?
left-handed. He doesn't have them.
Well, yeah, because he was adopted, right? He fell to Earth in a spaceship and was adopted, so that was
Like
How
that,
you
yeah.
find the aliens?
That's
Yeah.
right. But you can tell they're aliens when they don't have one.
So anybody watching this can find this for themselves, and what it does is it divides your cubit, which is elbow to fingertips in the golden ratio, also known as the divine proportion. And there we go. See, that's the small to the large is in the same ratio as the large is to the whole. There we go. And then, of course, if you flip your cubit up like this, and this floor, the tip of your head, you enlarge it to the scale of your full height, then the space in your wrist marks your navel, because your whole height is divided at your navel into golden sections. Those are just kind of some of the stuff that we got into in the workshop. And we had such a good time with it, and I've had such a positive response that I think we're going to do it again. And what we're thinking is another intro course, and then perhaps even maybe consolidating the two groups to going further into more advanced material. Because that's the stuff that gets, I love it all, but, just the basics, but where it gets really just compellingly interesting is when you get into these advanced things. And you begin to see how it's used to design cathedrals or mosques, or some of these amazing mosaics that we see in, Persian mosques and things. On and on, how the builders of the monumental earthworks in North America used it to lay out their templates. And we stress the point that temple, the word temple, template, tempo, temporal, all of these words are related, and they're relating time to space, time to pattern. See, because the template, geometry gives you the template, and that template is what's being used to lay out the temple. See? And then the temple is built, and we'll be doing some podcasts on this, by the way. Some of our Cosmographia podcasts are going to delve into this stuff. Particularly because it relates, when we talk about geometry, remember, we're talking about the measure of the earth. So that's what it literally means. So we're going to be talking about the earth as a whole, and looking at the geodetic context of the earth, right, which is the pattern of the earth's size and shape. And we'll demonstrate very convincing evidence that somebody way back in ancient history knew the size and shape of the earth with a high degree of accuracy. Or otherwise we're looking at something that's so darn coincidental that it almost requires us to redefine what we mean by the word coincidence. But yeah, so we'll be looking at a lot of that. But geometry leads us right into geography. geology. So people go, what's the connection between geometry and geology? Well, geo, it's the earth. The logos, the geologos, right? The word of the earth. The earth speaks to us. Just like the biblical, I think it's from Isaiah, speak to the earth and it shall teach thee. That's the whole idea of geology. You're entering into this dialogue with the earth. Geometry, you're measuring the size and the shape of the earth. And that's critically important because you change those parameters and everything else changes with it. And in fact, you change them too much, all of this stuff disappears. And that's where we get into the idea of the cataclysm and all this, because what we've seen is throughout Earth history, the bounds of global stability have been mostly preserved, but on a couple of occasions exceeded. And then what we see is that the Earth has to essentially go through this long period of readjustment, almost reincarnation, to come back again after some of these episodes with a whole new order of nature. And then we get onto the idea of a tempo, the idea of cycles, periodicities, the tempo of global change. And here again now see the word tempo. It's not tempo, it's a measure of time. So we'll find out. This gets us into the model of the Great Year, which is something that's coming up, which is, again, one of our inheritances from the past, is that ancient cultures had this concept of grand cycles of time. It was these grand cycles of time that governed the rise and fall of civilizations, the periodic epochal overturnings of nature, usually signified by great destructive floods and great destructive fires. In the Greek traditions, the great floods were the cataclysmos, from which we get the word cataclysm, ekparousis, from which we get the word pyro. Ekparousis was the destruction of the world by fire, and cataclysmos was the destruction of the world by fire. So what we now recognize is that cultures from all over the world had parallel traditions. And oftentimes these traditions took the model of a periodic upheavals, cycles, which gets us to the concept of tempo. And this brings us back to temporal, temple, right, template, all of these things, because what we learn in sacred geometry, and this is the other dimension of sacred geometry that makes it different from straightforward Euclidean geometry, is that when we begin to look at the ratios and the proportions and the numbers that emerge from the study of sacred geometry, what we realize is that those numbers, those proportions and ratios that give us the division in space also are giving us the division in time. So it's no coincidence that the numbers, let's say, dodecahedron. Well, just this is a beautiful example of what I'm talking about. You've got 12 faces, each of them are pentagons, right? And so each pentagon consists of 5 corners, and the angle between successive pairs of edges is 108 degrees. Now, 108 degrees is one of the as you guys know, is one of the fundamental numbers of the whole system. You know, the cosmological numbers that emerge from these geometric relationships. We find them at the core of the Sumerian king list. We find them at the core of the Vedas, the ancient Vedic tradition. We find them preserved in Egyptian architecture. We find the same numbers over here in monumental earthwork architecture of whoever these, not Pueblan, but whoever these people were of the eastern woodlands who built these amazing earthwork structures 1,000 to 3,000, 4,000 years ago in America, were versed in the same geometry and that used the same numbers. And of course, all of this is stuff we're going to be exploring in future episodes of the podcast. But going back to the dodecahedron, you've got 12 faces, right? Now, each face consists of a pentagon with 108 at each corner. So that means 108 times 5, which is the total number of degrees that measures the pentagon, right? What's 108 times 5? Well, it's 540 degrees. Now, if you want to, everybody listening to this, you can just, I know you've got your calculators right handy. You can pick up your calculator like this, and you can go 540, and then you can go times 12. There we are, times 12 equals 6,480. Look at there, Laura. There we go, Laura. Look at there. 6,480. So that verifies it. So what's that number? Well, we go that times 4, and we get this number. That number is the number of years traditionally in one precessional cycle, which is traditionally the Earth's axis doing this over a period of 50 arc seconds per year, 1 degree every 72 years, or 1 degree every human lifespan, and it takes then 72 times 360, or 25,920 years. Now that's the traditional number. The real number may be deviating from that traditional number, the idealized number somewhat. It probably does. And in fact, because of the fact that the precessional cycle as now measured is moving at slightly more than 50 arc seconds per year, that means that the total duration of the great year of precessional cycle is going to be somewhat less than 25,920. However, I don't think anybody's going to claim with 100% certainty that the modern rate of precession is constant throughout the entire cycle. So it could be that is, just like, because in all elliptical orbits, we know that as the orbiting object is approaching one of the foci, it accelerates. And so we know that the velocity around an elliptical orbit is inconstant. So we don't know. But the number 25,920 is actually closer to the real number than the round number that's typically given in textbooks, which is 26,000. So I like the number 25,920. And if we think of that as a representative of this great year cycle, right, during which, there's basically a whole revolution of, just like in the annual cycle, particularly if you live in the more temperate latitudes, it can be a pretty profound change, at one point to 6 months later, right? I mean, think of from July or figure from June to December, right? Or July to January. Can be pretty distinct change, right? So you have this annual revolution, this annual turnover of the natural order, which is cyclical, which is regular. Our entire basis of our agricultural system, our economic system, our social system is embedded completely in that annual cycle. Now so less than it used to be, but just a couple of generations ago, it was completely controlled by that natural cycle. The day-night cycle. I mean, look, people used to go to bed as soon as the sun went down because they didn't have lights, 100 years ago. So my point is that we've got these cycles, and in the traditional model, in the archaic mind, what they were looking at was this resonance between the small and the large, between the small and the great, right? Because they understood that something we've been talking about throughout this podcast, which is the idea of scale and variance. So that in geology, we all know scale and variance, which is that, you look at the small scale and it can be very corresponding to the large scale. And unless you have some scaling factor in there, you could look at an outcrop and go, is that outcrop 3 feet high or 1,000 feet high? So you put something in there for scale because so many phenomena within the geological realm is scale and variance. So we find that same principle, we present that and teach that principle in sacred geometry, the scale and variant nature of these patterns. Well, in the archaic mind, the cyclical repetitions were also scale and variant, so that there were cycles within cycles. Ezekiel's metaphor of wheels within wheels, I think, is applicable here. But so we have a daily cycle, we have an annual cycle, but in the archaic mind there were greater cycles. And these greater cycles and the understanding of these greater cycles was the basis of prophecy. You see, imagine this, Russ, that you were living with a tribe of people, and for whatever reason, something happened. Let's say that it's early spring, or let's say it's summer. Something happens, the water gets contaminated, everybody drinks it, and their memories are erased, except for you, for whatever reason. So now it's summertime, and the days go by, and just like when you're young, time seems extended compared to as you get older, it seems to contract, right? So you're young in mind because you don't remember anything that preceded it, right? And so now each day goes by, and 1 week goes by, and each day is pretty much like the previous day. Another week goes by, each day is pretty much like the previous day. After a month of this, you're pretty much convinced, hey, this is the way it is. It ain't going to change because this is the way it is. But you, Russ, because your memory extends back, you go, wait a second, this is going to change. And this nice, warm, balmy weather that we're enjoying here, it's going to change. It's going to get cold, right? In fact, it's even going to go below freezing, and snow is going to fall. And 4 months, 5 to 6 months from now, it's going to be a completely different world than that.
And the rest of the people are like, burn him at the stake.
Yeah, get out of here, get out of here. But see, Russ, what it is you're the prophet now. See, because you understand, you're simply looking at things from a larger perspective. And really, that's all that differentiates you from everyone else. Because everyone else is suffering from a form of amnesia. And your understanding are these larger cycles. So that's what essentially makes you a prophet. If you go into to look at the Old Testament prophets and start reading them, well, what you see is, what are they prophesizing? They're prophesizing, whether it's Ezekiel or Isaiah, or even in the New Testament, St. John and Revelations, they're prophesizing about these larger cosmic changes that are part of the system. That's what they're doing, at least in my opinion, and as a result of my studies of it. But getting back to the dodecahedron, we've got 6,480. We found out that was 1/4 of the processional cycle. Well, in the conventional concept, that was the 4 seasons of the great year. And the changing in many of the concepts, the idea was that the changing of the seasons were the periods of vulnerability. In other words, when it's changing from cosmic spring to cosmic summer, from cosmic summer to cosmic fall, from cosmic fall to cosmic winter, in those transition points is where the earth was vulnerable, where nature was vulnerable to these upheavals, these periods of compressed, concentrated, accelerated change. You see, so that's just because that belief that somehow that there was actually a global response that was tied into these cycles of change. That's why it was so important, such an important doctrine to preserve through ritual, through symbol, through sacred writings, through the textbook of architecture, to preserve these ideas and concepts of the great year. Because at some point, inevitably, those cycles will come around again. Just like, even though your tribe with amnesia doesn't remember the previous winter, you do. You know that winter is coming sooner or later. And just like within the continuum of transitions, there are points that would be thought of as the key points were the points of discontinuity, if you will. In the smaller scale, look at the annual year. Okay, so there will be, there will be a day where, it's cooling off, but then a threshold is crossed the day the temperature drops below freezing, right? So each year you don't know, for example, you can't predict the exact day or the exact hour that you'll have the first freeze, right? But you can predict it pretty darn close, usually within a week, usually within a few days, right? By looking at past time. But that's a threshold because, if we go below freezing, we got to go out and protect the plants tonight.
Really?
You got to do something different because that's a significant threshold that's being crossed. Now, on the cosmic scale, that threshold may be such that, just like, the first freezing, if you don't protect your plants all die, and you have to start over again. on the cosmic scale, civilizations die and you have to start over again. That's a little bit, I kind of got into a long-winded rant there, but all of that basically comes out of this, the notions of sacred geometry. So people are wondering, what is sacred geometry? I'll also mention this. Sacred, the word sacred means to fix, in the Latin, fix something. That's why the 5 fused vertebrae at the base of your spine are called the sacral, right? Because they're the fused vertebrae, they're fixed, right? Because in these geometric exercises, the idea is you're fixing this matrix of energy by giving it a form that it can actually manifest in. So we do an exercise that links the hexagon to the pentagon, right? Now, nature utilizes that for molecular geometry, and we find that link between the 5-fold geometry and the 6-fold geometry prevalent. Particularly, we find it in biological systems, and we find it intrinsic right to the human DNA. And so you got to think of geometry as being this form that allows the fixation of what would otherwise be pulsating energy to actually now manifest into a material 3-dimensional form. So this is, when you say sacred, that it's carrying that implication that you're fixing the energy that would otherwise in a sense be chaotic, unfolding in a unorganized, disorganized fashion. Now you're giving it this template, this form that can fixate itself in, and now something can happen. A crystallization can take place around that. Molecules can begin to assemble themselves around that particular geometry. But the idea is that underlying the form, there is the archetypal pattern. That was the whole Platonic model of the universe, is that the universe is modeled upon this archetypal pattern. And that archetypal pattern is scale invariant, whether you're talking about the cosmic scale or the microcosmic. So if people are interested, we will be announcing upcoming classes and workshops in sacred geometry. Particularly, I like to make it a practical craft, art, science craft, whatever you want to call it. So, architects, anybody who's a designer, a builder. In the courses I've done in the past, I've had people who were, I had a lady who was a quilter, and she made these magnificent quilts using the geometric patterns that we were learning about in class. I had another fellow who was his hobby was stained glass. So we would have an exercise in the class, and then the following week he would come in with a stained glass window that he had made. Obviously for architects, but anybody who builds furniture, Kyle, of course, you'd be able to see, I'm sure, multiple applications to music, and you already know some. I know because we've talked about it. But and Robert Dakota, who organized this particular workshop, he does a lot of mosaic work, particularly mosaic tile work, and the Persians were highly skilled in mosaics, and they utilize these very principles of sacred geometry to design these incredible facades of mosaic tile. So part of my approach is, we get into the physics, the philosophy of it, we get into some of the history of it, but also it's very much oriented towards practical, hands-on. How would you take this stuff and go out and create things in the world with it? Which I think is something the world could use more of.
Absolutely.
So now I know why I got this background here, because just damn. Almost awesome, Michael. So ideally, right, these classes are going to be, you'll have one starting up in the Atlanta area, and then hopefully it's going to continue on for groups in Sedona.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to be remaking the recorded classes that people can purchase. Mm-hmm. And then I also imagine there once you get this down and have a really refined version of it, then there'll be an online class version also, like a live webinar series that people will be able to get into. So
Yes. In fact, what
make
think?
sure it has to get out, and it's fun.
Oh, it is. It's a lot of fun. And of course, my long range dream and vision, which is going to happen soon, is that we start creating an infrastructure utilizing the archaic principles, which involves the geometry, which involves the cosmic orientation, which involves the geodetic and geomantic mapping of a site, starting with a map of the patterns of energy prevalent in a site, which relates directly to the geomagnetic field, to the type of minerals, ores, the hydrosphere, that is the motion of subterranean water, surface water, what kind of plants are growing.
This is a really good run.
The angles of the sun throughout the course of the year. All of these things taken into account to create a geomantic map of a site, so that you can get the fundamental, just in all cultures, ancient cultures, it always started with the same act. And that act was the placement of the nomen pole, right? The staff placed into the ground, and that staff then becomes the center of that first circle. And from that circle, then the whole template is generated that now can give you a single building, or it can give you an entire urban complex. When we start talking about and getting into the Chaco culture of the Southwest, you'll see some beautiful examples of how this works, and how you have the sacred center was right there at Chaco Canyon, but the entire 10,000 square miles of the development of the San Juan Basin, the whole infrastructure was laid out according to this pattern. So on the Earth, you have this geometric template, but that geometric template is reflecting the motions of the heavens above. So as the Earth is turning, you have the wheeling motions of the heavens. You're going to have points on the horizon of rising and setting of key points within the celestial sphere, right? The sun, during the course of the year, through its annual cycle, you'll have 2 solstices and you'll have 2 equinoxes, right? The position of the moon through its 18.6-year cycle between its succession of maximum and minimums. What that does is it traces the succession of points on the horizon. And those points on the horizon now become linked back to your sacred center and creates the basic angular relationships that are embedded in your template. And then your infrastructure is laid out according to that. So, for example, in the southwestern deserts, there's a series of roads, concentric or radial roads extending out from Chaco Canyon. Well, those roads aren't randomly placed. If you're making at the right time of year a pilgrimage traveling, say, from the sacred center of Chaco Canyon, one of the outliers could be Chimney Rock, right? That we visited during our southern Colorado trip. Well, when you're traversing those lines, you're mimicking the heavens above, and your point on the horizon that is your orientation point could be the solstice sunrise. It could be the position of the moon. It might be the position of the rising or setting of the Pleiades or the dog star. But the point is that when you create this infrastructure that reflects the heavens, and then your day-to-day life is embedded and oriented within that system, well, it does something to the consciousness. It integrates your consciousness of the world here below with the greater world above. And the motions and patterns unfolding in that world, which of course follow a tempo. And now again, we have the linking of tempo and template. The template is on the earth, but that template also, it's like fixating certain points within the continuum of cyclic time. Because there are certain points that are auspicious. They're the power points, right? That's where the stuff happens. What the Carlos Castaneda books used to refer to as the crack between the worlds, right? So you know that exactly at dusk when the sun is setting right on the horizon, that's when, according to traditional shamanic accounts, that's when the crack between the worlds opens up momentarily, right? So the idea is we, in our modern culture, have become disconnected. And I think part of the strategy going forward that's going to maximize the probabilities of us being able to sustain this experimented civilization that we are now engaged in, that will permit this civilization that we're going to have the maximum probabilities of surviving successfully is by relinking, by reforging those connections between the mundane and the cosmic. And so that's kind of the whole point of sacred geometry. And so what I'm getting at here is that at some point, what I could see happening as an outgrowth of our efforts here is that we begin pulling the resources together to create a prototypical expression of the ancient principles, but then cast into a modern 21st century form, suitable for our own time. And I think that would be a very exciting project. And a lot of fun. And so that's the idea. Think about this is a school in the real sense. You know, in the curriculum of the school, all of the things that would be imparted, the knowledge that would be imparted, is in the creation itself of that infrastructure. See? That's the curriculum. The curriculum is the creation of that infrastructure. So we go out and we set that hole into the ground. And we draw a circle around it. And we begin taking observations at certain key points. We wait, and the sun will give us angles, and those angles will give us the preliminary lines from which we can then extrapolate our template, see? And we do that. We lay that out. We use geometry. And then from there, we begin to gather the resources and the materials, and we begin to develop this thing. And it serves as a prototype of the archaic system that we can find on virtually every continent, I guess with the exclusion of Antarctica at this point. Who knows what we might find embedded within the ice of Antarctica, but on every continent we find the same system, even though the outer expressions are very diverse. You know, nobody's gonna mistake an Egyptian temple for a truncated pyramid in Ohio, right? But underlying that, that's my point here, underlying that is the same template. It is as if all of these ancient builders and architects all over the ancient world, not only dispersed geographically, but dispersed, throughout history, were all working from the same template. And now, right in the nick of time, we've begun to recover that template, right? But for what purpose? It would have no purpose unless we were to now actually somehow were able to utilize that template. And so that's where I would like to see this thing go in the next few years. And you think about, I remember wanting to
build something with it.
Build something with it, yes. Just like the movie, the baseball movie, build it, they will come. When I heard that on that, we actually enjoyed it. But we could, because at the end of the movie, they all came, right? Everybody started coming. Remember the long line of, what was that movie? Oh, Field of Dreams. Field of Dreams, right. Baseball, by the way, which we talked about, is actually a safety. We should circle back to that sometime, huh? Yeah. But
I want to say that was a theme that continued on through the following weekend. The idea of reconnecting, because we had the contact with the cabin event that the Snake Brothers and Laura also went, and Dave Matheson was there. So reconnecting with the stars, and we went out in Bryce Canyon, late at night, one of the protected darkest sky spots in the country, and just reorienting ourselves to the sky and the constellations and the grand stories and myths that were connected to those constellations. Reconnecting. So that is a big theme, and we're going to stick with that, and that's going to be so important. The natural world is reaching out to us if we'll listen.
Yeah, and Dave's going to be with us in.
Yeah, we'll have the next contact of the cabin event coming up right in the next few weeks for us. Yeah,
so this is going to be a really interesting mix because we're going to have this mingling now. Dave is bringing in the whole cosmic dimension, which of course I'm always referring to that, but the focus from my perspective is going to be on the earth. It's going to be on the rocks beneath our feet. right? Of course, and then ultimately with the idea that there is a connection between what we're seeing what we're seeing etched, engraved, I'll use the word engraved into the earth, and what is happening above our heads. And then there will be Dave bringing in those amazing stories that he tells and those connections, those cosmic connections. I think it's going to be a rich experience, and hopefully we're going to be doing
Dave
this on
takes
a
the high
regular
road,
basis.
Randall takes the low.
And the other thing is
A true cosmographic event.
There we go, yes.
and Brandon Powell,
Cosmic.
Oh, and Brandon's going to be there.
he's kind of like reconnecting with your body
Yeah.
through the breathing, the Wim Hof methods, and all that kind of stuff. And so it's an interesting.
Yeah, Kyle and I joined Brandon this past trip on setting up the beat and the music for that. It was a lot of fun.
And does Brandon get into the brain function changes that occur once you get that rhythm of 6 breaths per minute?
He doesn't talk about that, he just gets people to do the breath work and it happens.
Right. Okay. Because once you do that, boom, you immediately start getting into the sacred numbers. Yeah, there's a lot of research showing that repetition of 6 breaths per minute.
And 60 heartbeats a minute.
Yeah. And 60 heartbeats. Really, is that what it is? 60 heartbeats? Wow. So anyways, pretty interesting stuff, I would say. Oh, the last thing I was going to say, though, was about, the idea of the Holy City, which was something, Matt Lohmeyer was there. Matt Lohmeyer, Lieutenant Colonel Matt Lohmeyer was attending the workshop. And he's high-ranking in Space Force, which, interestingly, I found out getting to know him, that there is a definite contingent or a definite role, mission statement for Space Force of setting up a planetary defense system. And so I have been invited, this will probably happen later in the summer next fall, to actually go and address the base commanders of Space Force about the idea of planetary defense. So that'll be kind of exciting. But what was I going to say about him? Oh, is that
The Holy City.
the Holy City. He was very interested in the Holy City and the whole concept of the Holy City, which of course comes, both, Ezekiel talks about the Holy City, Book of Revelations talks about the Holy City. So we did get into that a little bit in the workshop. Usually I save that for later on because, if we get into a whole, once you have the tools of geometry and the canon of sacred numbers, then you can get into an analysis. But, if you read the verses, it's the city descendeth out of heavens, adorned as a bride for her husband, etc. But then it says that the city lieth foursquare, the height, the breadth, the length, the height, and the breadth of it are equal, 12,000 furlongs. There's a wall great and high, 144 cubits. And so right there, it's giving you basic enough information to establish some fundamental relationships. And once you do that, then you begin to realize that, there's a whole lot more there that just when you talk about the 144 cubits, like if you take the 144 cubits, we'll just do this as a quick example, times the standard Hebrew cubit, the 144 cubits, the Hebrew cubit is 18 inches, right? So if you go that times 18 inches, you'll notice right there the number that comes up is 1/10 of the precessional cycle. That's pretty wild. Then if you think in terms of feet, right, the Hebrew cubit is 1.5 feet, right? So you go 144 times 1.5 and you get 216, which is the cube of 6. So right there, it leads you right into a geometry. 6 by 6 by 6 is the cube of 6, right? But also raise that number by the power of 10, and you have the diameter of the moon in miles, right? So again, the reductionist who tries to strip existence and the world of all meaning for whatever psychological need they have to strip the world of meaning, dismisses that as coincidence, right? Well, all right, first of all, what they're going to say, well, that's only if you measure it in miles, right? And that's completely arbitrary. To which I would respond, well, maybe what this is suggesting to us is that it's not completely arbitrary. You know, maybe there's something intrinsic to the mile itself that means that if we use the mile to begin measuring cosmic dimensions, we get those numbers. But the other thing is this, that if instead of the Hebrew cubit, what if we use the Egyptian royal cubit, right? Now, if I go put 1.727272, which is, you know, if you look at the Egyptian royal cubit, it's been measured very precisely. Newton deciphered it from his studies of the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. I think it was Reginald Greaves. Several other people have independently discerned the royal cubit, right? And so if we use the slightly longer version, which is this, right? And then we go times 144, we get this. Now if I go that times 100, we get this. And now if I divide that by pi, we get this, which is the polar diameter of the Earth. Is that a coincidence?
What was the 1.7272?
That was the royal cubit in feet.
Okay.
So you take the 144 cubits in the wall, great and high, of the holy city, and you measure it according to probably two of the most prevalent cubit, the Hebrew cubit and the Egyptian cubit. And in both cases, you come up with these significant numbers. Now, using the royal cubit, raising it up, you know, by a power of 10 to the second power, coming up with the polar radius of the Earth, very, very close, that's pretty remarkable, if you ask me. But again, you know, some people are going to look at it, and they're going to get a sense that, man, there's something there. There's a connection. I don't know what it is. Then you'll have other people who will just dismiss it. There's no meaning to it. It's just coincidence. Well,
yeah, they're like you can find those same coincidences in measuring a stool or something. They always say that.
Right, but the fact of the matter is no.
Who built that stool?
Yeah, somebody built the stool knowing what they were doing. Probably
in the stool. Well, or you know, because the stool is proportioned to the human anatomy.
Right.
Which brings us back to the mile, because you know the origin of the mile, right? It's 1,000 paces. Mil means Latin for 1,000. So you had a Roman mile that was 1,000 paces from, think of this, the Roman city, the center of the city was the pole, right? Everything was measured out from that. So the Roman mile was a standardization of 1,000 paces from the city center, right? Our mile of 5,280 feet is a standardization, is it not? Right? 1,000 paces of 5.28 feet each. Now, in the case of the Roman mile, the Romans were of smaller stature than at whatever point the imperial mile was established. My pace, I'm 6'1", my pace is slightly longer, so my mile would be a little bit actually closer to the nautical mile than the imperial mile, which is the 5,280 feet. But everybody in America, everybody in Britain, we use the imperial mile, which is 5,280 feet, right? So what that means is that there's a ratio going on there. That's 1,000 paces of 5.28 feet, right? Right? If you take 1,000 of those, you've walked 5,280 feet. Right, now think about that. The foot and the pace. So both of those now, and the pace ultimately, the mile ultimately derivative of the pace. The mile and the foot, the pace, are all derivative of the human scale, the human anatomy, right? Now, You could say, well, I have a bigger foot, I have a bigger pace. I have a smaller foot, a smaller pace. But what happens is, again, like with the golden section, if you start measuring a lot of people, what you're going to find out is, everybody deviates a little bit, right? But if you get enough people and measure enough people, and your database gets broad enough, the more people you get in there, the closer you get to the ideal geometry, which is the golden section, right? You can find the mean, right? The golden mean. Well, same with the ratio between the foot and the pace, right? So it turns out that if we were to go out, and this is a fun experiment to do, and I've actually done this in some of the sacred geometry workshops. Get out there and pace off, let's say, it's impractical to pace off 1,000, so we pace off 100 paces. And we measure that. I have my 150-foot fiberglass tape. We actually measure 100 paces. And then from that, we determine what's your average pace. What's your foot length? Then we get that ratio, and it'll turn out to be very close to 5.28, right? Now, symbolically, think about this. Your foot, right, is what connects you to the earth, doesn't it? Right? Imagine, Kyle, if you didn't have any feet. Right? Suppose you just your shins just ended at your ankles and you had no feet. Well, you'd have a hard time standing up, right? Right? With those feet stabilize you on the earth. They connect you to the earth. Right? Now your pace allows you to move around on the to motivate around on the earth. Right? It gives you the ability to move on the earth. You see, the foot and the pace are linked in that way. The foot connects you to the earth, and then the pace is your measure of your ability to move over the face of the earth. And then that ratio becomes 5.28, and that times 1,000 gives us our mile, which actually has its roots way, way back in ancient history. And we won't get into that now, but I can show you right now that, like, the radius of the Sarsen stone circle at Stonehenge, it's very close to being 52.8 feet. Very close, within a few inches of being 52.8 feet. Okay, but now let's circle back for a second to the idea of the holy city. The city lieth four square. The length, the height, and the breadth of it are equal, 12,000 furlongs, right? So if we go, and I'll take my calculator again, and if I put in 12,000 furlongs, there's my 12,000 furlong. How long is a furlong? You know, don't you, Mike? How long's a furlong?
I don't know how long a furlong is.
Kyle? Russ? Laura? And Laura, you should know how long a furlong is.
We've talked about it, but I can't remember.
Where are furlongs being used today?
It's not a
Racetracks.
Racetracks. A furlong is 660 feet.
That's right.
Okay, so before I get to the holy city, let's just look at the furlong for a second. We go 660 feet. There it is. 660 feet, right? Now each of these feet consists of inches. Now again, inches from the human scale, right? The inch is the width of your thumb, basically, standardized, right? So this is now our for all cosmographians, this is now 2 thumbs up. You're thinking about 2 inches. You're thinking about, you're thinking about the digit. And 12 of those gives you a foot, right? Just as there's 12 months in the year, there are 12 Platonic months in the great year, right? There are 12 inches in a foot. So here we have this relationship again between the measures of time and the measures of space. Okay, so now 660 feet in a furlong, and I'm going to convert that to inches by going times 12, and we get this number right here, which is the mean diameter of the earth. Think about this. Take the whole diameter of the earth, you pace off 1,000 paces, 1 mile. That mile to the diameter of the earth is the same as if you went and laid out a furlong, 660 feet, right? That's over 2 football fields in length, 2 football fields plus another 60 feet, right? And you marked off 1 inch on that furlong, the inch to that furlong is going to be proportional to the mile as the mile is to the earth. So now, in a sense, you can almost get sort of a God's eye perspective on the thing. But see, it doesn't stop there. We go 12,000 furlongs, right? So we've just determined that a furlong is 660 feet. And there are 5,280 feet in a mile, right? So then if we divide that by 660, we see that there's exactly 8 furlongs in a mile, which tells us right there that the furlong and the mile are part of the same system. Otherwise, it's highly unlikely that there'd be an exact even number of furlongs in a mile, correct? Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the 12,000 furlongs. There's my number, 12,000 furlongs. How many feet is that? Well, it's a big number. Let's go times, I said 12,000 furlongs times 660. And guess how many feet that is? 1,000 times the mean diameter of the Earth in miles. But that's not actually how big it is. That's simply the ratio. That's the number of feet. 660 furlongs times 12,000 gives us that number of feet. 660 furlong, 12,000 furlongs then is 7,920,000 feet, right? Now let's convert that to miles. If I convert that to miles, 7,920,000 feet is 1,500 miles on a side. 1,500 miles on a side. It's described as a cube. 1,500 miles on a side. So what is it, what relates to that? Was there something, I mean, the Earth is 2,100, I mean, the moon is 2,160. So it's smaller than the moon. What's it referring to? I don't know. But
Could it be?
go ahead, yeah.
Or could it be something about the layout of, say, longitude and latitude? Some principle that they may have.
Sure. Yeah, it could be. It could be. But notice this. I'm going to show you something. 1,500 feet. Okay. So now if I put in the mean diameter of the Earth, and I divide it by, that's in miles, I divide it by the 1,500 miles, check out what you get. You see this, Kyle?
I see that.
I don't want you to miss this. Yeah, 5.2. Same ratio. Scale and variance. What's? Kyle's at a loss for words.
Randall,
Back up a little bit. What's the angle of the pyramid, the Great Pyramid?
51.85 degrees slope to base. And I can tell Mike is struggling with this. Mike wants this to be an easy coincidence so bad.
No. It's the same discussion you and I had one time over at Brad's place, his condo here in Atlanta. Yeah, you rattle all these numbers off, and they're fascinating. But what does it mean, Randall? I mean, to me, it's just like it's playing calculator games. You know, you talk about, you describe the cube of the holy city. But hey, you could be describing the Borg cube for all I know. You know, what does it mean? What's, you know?
Well, that's for each individual. The caveat I said at the beginning is that, you know, a lot of people really will find no meaning. And probably for those people, there is no meaning. So what can I say? You know, I think it's showing us that there is kind of what the traditional accounts have said all along. What Plato said, what Pythagoras said, is that there is an archetypal level of reality. And that reality is And all of these relationships that we see around us somehow are expressions of this archetypal pattern, this substrate of creation. That's kind of the whole idea behind sacred geometry, is that there is this template. You know, maybe you could think of it in terms of popular culture, think of it as the matrix, that there's this matrix. And what we're seeing here, again, I made the point that it could be dismissed as coincidence. And yes, it might have no meaning at all that there are these relationships. It might be completely meaningless that the relationship of the symbolic holy city in the book of Revelations to the earth is precisely the same as the ratio of the foot to the pace. Or on the other hand, it's pointing us in the direction that there's a common set of ratios and proportions linking all domains of reality. That's kind of where I would go with it.
Yeah,
But again, I am not trying to convince anybody of anything. I've learned years ago that you present this stuff, some people immediately begin to see, oh wow, there's this something else going on outside the realm of what we normally see, what we're normally cognizant of. And maybe some of these sacred rites, the fact that the same numbers show up in Vedic cosmology, and those same numbers I can show you over and over again. Monumental truncated pyramids in the eastern woodlands of North America that are 1,080 feet on a side. And that's the fundamental number of the whole Vedic cosmological system. What does it mean? I don't know. Maybe it is just coincidence. Or it may tell us that all of these people were working from a common template. And if that's the case, we have to be thinking about a completely different model of history. It means that a very important dimension of our historical human experience on this planet has been totally neglected by mainstream academia. But then you go and you begin to look at the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians and the various occultists, the alchemists, the Kabbalists. All of these people all along have been saying there is this invisible substance. The Pythagoreans, the Neo-Pythagoreans, the Platonists, the Neoplatonists, all said the same thing, that there is an archetypal realm, and that the link between our visible, tangible world of three-dimensional reality and this invisible archetypal world lies in the realm of geometry and these proportional relationships. And maybe that somehow we, in our own framework, the proportions and dimensions of our own framework are somehow reflecting this greater reality. Not a reality that transcends both time and space, because out of that reality comes measures of time and measures of space being linked by the same numbers. That's what one of the things I'm trying to show over and over again. And the same numbers, this canon of cosmological numbers, can be used to express these relationships in terms of space and in terms of time. And so in the geometry courses that I've done and developed over the years, basically the idea is to go through this geometric language and get this geometric language and these patterns, these diagrams embedded in your consciousness, and then you begin to see them in the world. Now, what it ultimately means, I try not to really even go there and define that too much. I would prefer to say, look, here are the numbers, here's the correlations, here are the coincidences. At what point does coincidence phase out of being meaningless into that there's actually a meaningful pattern? I remember when we had the discussion, the debate with Michael Shermer, he was talking about pattern recognition, and that people, well, so many of these people are just projecting patterns. Well, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Are those projections of patterns just coming from a completely unreal place? Or is it, in fact, the condition that our very consciousness is ordered according to the very same patterns? I don't know. But the fact that these numbers show up over and over again in these relationships, to me, it signals something. It signals that, yeah, maybe there's something going on here that that we have not really in our day-to-day consciousness we're kind of unaware of. But once you become aware of it, then you begin to looking into all of these other places, and it begins to show up. It shows up in the Bible. It shows up in the Vedas. It shows up in the Egyptian temples. The pyramid, the Great Pyramid is like pure geometry, and we'll devote a whole session to that at some point, looking at the geodetic correlations embodied in the dimensions of the Great Pyramid.
But when you talk about the geometry, does it hold true with a number system other than base 10? Does it hold true beyond what we understand is our mathematics? Is it universal?
Well,
It doesn't matter what base number it is, because when you're talking about this lengths of things, whether it's time or distance. So it doesn't matter what units you use.
Okay.
well,
You still get the correlations, the numbers.
yes and no. When you're talking about proportions, the units are irrelevant.
Right.
But when you're talking about getting the same set of the same canon of numbers, now that's when. And here's the thing.
Right. Then you need to use similar.
Right. Those numbers show up in all the continents, those same numbers. And when we use the miles or other key dimensional units to measure the cosmic dimensions, the cosmic spaces, yes, then the numbers show up.
Yeah. And time is measured in base 60.
There's a
It's not
hexadecimal system, right? The base 10 and base 60,
Yes.
which is old.
Right. Usually attributed to the Sumerians, but it probably preceded the Sumerians. So, Mike, I think we just got to get you out at some point and feed you some shrooms. And you might. Then,
We can
at
start
that
with
point,
the
Mike,
DFE.
I can.
And not
0 to 60.
I missed that part of the 60s. I'm sorry.
well, it's never too late.
I would probably fumble over my words, but I could try to describe or explain what it means to me as somebody that's been a student of this for 25 years.
Yeah.
Recognizing these numbers and having Randall and a couple of my previous teachers, point these things out. There's some sort of grand organization.
I agree.
To the whole system. It started for me when before I ever met these teachers, that the fact that the moon out in the heavens takes up the exact same space as the sun, and you can have this gorgeous solar eclipse with this corona, with this ring. When I saw that when I was a teenager, it was just so stunning to me that there's got to be some, and this word's charged, but some divine organization, so some more grand architect or organization to this whole system that we're part of, and we're a microcosm of this big macro system that we can't even really comprehend at this point, but it's fractal, and we can recognize that pattern, and then that's a doorway into doing something with it, doing something about it, creating something greater, being part of that grand organization, not just walking through, I'm alive. Let's be part of something and do something bigger, because it's showing us that there is some bigger, perfection's not the word, but ideal to it that we can also participate in.
I agree. It's not coincidence. Okay, there are too many patterns there. You mentioned pattern recognition earlier, that perhaps people do tend to see patterns where there aren't any, but there are too many things that line up. Like Brad was talking about fractals, and Mandelbrot says you see everywhere in nature. But like I said, it goes back to how do you tie it all together? What does it mean? I understand we're venturing from physics and geometry and philosophy at this point, but isn't that kind of what you're doing with sacred geometry?
This is your entry point.
I tried to explain that I think if I had to say what it means, and really I'm still at the stage where I'm going,
Take a look at this.
what the F does this all mean? You know, I'm still at that stage.
Yeah, Mike, I think the thing I take away from it, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Randall, but the big thing I take away from it is that there is a meaning. That's the meaning I take from it. In other words, that
Good point.
You know, yeah, like I don't know what that meaning is, but the meaning that it gives me is that there is something there beyond coincidence, beyond accident. I don't have the answer for what the meaning is, but just the fact that there is meaning in these patterns gives me meaning. And then the fact that all the evidence points to ancient civilizations all over the world throughout time have been studying this and implementing it and using it and putting it in every possible way into their stories and their architecture and their buildings and everything else. That also gives me meaning and makes me study them. So
They're
that's
trying to communicate it
right.
to the future.
Well, yeah, and
That's what it seems like.
yeah, it does. I think that's part of it. And from our perspective, I don't think we ever would have any hope of penetrating the archaic mind without being familiar with these
That's right,
concepts.
because it's everywhere in all of their most, you know, their most profound things that they did. This is what sits at the heart of it every time, and that also gives it more meaning.
But like I said, Mike, the fundamental number of the whole Vedic cosmological system is 108. And so you can generate all these numbers, other numbers from multiples of 108. Well, like Brad said, you know, you draw a circle with the radius of the moon, it's 1,080 miles, 108 times 10. Well, again, you could say, well, that's only, you know, using miles. And I tried to explain that maybe there's more to the origin of the mile than just some arbitrary number. But when you look at the fact that if you take the diameter of the moon, referring back to what Brad was saying about this remarkable coincidence of the juxtaposition of the solar, the lunar orb on the solar disk, when we get these, you know, total solar eclipses, well, that stems from one relationship, and this is a proportional relationship, so it doesn't matter what units we use, but if you take the diameter of the sun times 108, let me just do it. Let me take it. So look at here. I'll put in the diameter of the sun, 864,000 miles. So 864,000 miles.